Hello, everybody, and welcome to another storytime video. If you've never seen one of these, or you don't know what it is, or anything like that, then basically we're going to be starting a tabletop RPG series in the Star Wars universe later this fall. And we've been playing our game since pretty much February of 2016, and we want to catch everybody up on all the stuff that has happened in our game that is relevant information, because when we finish our current story arc, which we're considering episode 1, and we get into when we're starting the series, which will be episode 2, you guys will be kind of caught up and be able to, follow along with the characters and what's going on. So with that, we last left off in a interesting spot because we had played a session, and then I did a private session with Six Pounder, and we turned his character Doc into, a Jedi, and then we went back, and this is all within a week. So we played in the middle of the week, me and Six played, and then we went back and played again on our normal time. So to the rest of the players, no time has really passed at all in the game. In fact, what they see, and that's where we start this next session, is they see Doc disappear. And suddenly, out of nowhere, comes walking out this man in robes with the hood over his head. And they go to fire, and they're ready to take this guy out because he obviously, took Doc or something, and they can't explain it. So they go to fire, and then the hood goes down, and you see Doc's hands like, no, 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 it's me, it's me, it's me. And they're all like really suspicious, like, what the heck just happened? How did you disappear? Now you have ropes, and where's that weapon and that you just picked up? And what the heck? Like, what's going on here? And over the course of a few minutes, Doc kind of catches them up on everything. And what I find really interesting about this is he obscures some information here, and he tells them of everything that happened. There's this giant creature called the Sleeper, and he wants to eat me, so don't go down there because it's really, really bad. And for whatever reason, there's some kind of time dilation in this cave. I can't explain it. Don't ask me. And then he just keeps going on and telling them all the players about his visions. Except what I find really interesting is he gives some misinformation on purpose. You see, in his vision with the Wookiee, where he saves the Wookiee, or tries to save the feral Wookiee by giving him the potion, and he kind of drinks the wrong one, or gives the wrong one to the Wookiee and ends up killing the Wookiee. When he tells that story back to the players, he says, oh yeah, no, I totally gave him the right one, and he was totally okay. And that is going to be really important in the future. We may not get to it this episode, but trust me when I say that it causes a little bit of conflict between the characters, him telling that wrong information. So we move on. The players get some rest, heal up, because they hadn't had a chance to do this yet. And what I find really interesting is none of them decided to use that time dilation. They pretty much stuck to their guns when it came to Doc's word of, like, don't go down there, where all they really had to do is go into the mouth of the cave, and then they're affected by the time dilation because that's what that Vergence does. Now, Vergence in the Star Wars universe is just a place of power where the Force meets the physical world. And with that, this is a Vergence. It's one I made up, but it works really well within the confines of the story on Dathomir and what's going on Dathomir, I got the hiccups. And the sad thing with it is they could easily use this Vergence for many things. Just off the top of my head, they could rest in it, so that way the rest of the time that passes is not passing that quickly on the outside world. So they could easily rest up and then just go, or go and do an event, go back to the cave, rest up, and then go. That way these enemies they're fighting wouldn't be like, how they would be so confused, like how these people are resting up and getting healed up and everything in this amount of time and everything. It would be interesting, but they decided not to use it at all, which I find intriguing. But maybe in the future they'll be like, oh hey, remember that cave? We could totally use that for this one thing. Like, I don't know what the use of that would be, but it exists. So because it's in my world now, they can totally use it, which I find really, really cool. So the other thing, they heal up, then they decide to, sleep. They sleep, they wake up in the morning, and then they take off. They head south to Camp Toro, which is a camp that they scouted out when they first landed, and that's where they were headed to begin with before they got attacked by the Rancor. And on their way down there, they're making plenty of perception checks. In fact, I've had Venator at this point make a ton of perception checks, and he's kind of going like, "Why are you making me make these really different perception checks to everybody else, and why are they so difficult?" And I'm like, "Oh, no reason. Just if you pass, you pass. If you don't, you don't." And he's just like, "Okay." And what I had happen was, since the beginning of them landing, they've been tailed by somebody who's following them, and that person is jumping through the trees and being really creepy about it. But they have not noticed this person as of this point. The other perception checks that are going on are to see basically if they are paying enough attention to see that there's an ambush coming up. And eventually they do make the right perception check, and Alask and Cookie, who are out in front at this point, kind of look around and they notice that there's some movement in the bushes around them, and then suddenly they see a man standing in the middle of the road. And it's a Zabrak man, so it's one of the Knight brothers. And they walk up to him and they try to have a conversation with him, but basically he just tells them to get off his planet because they don't like outsiders. So, leave or die is basically the two options this guy gives them. And he looks kind of suspicious. And then the players are like, "But why do you, like, it doesn't make any sense." And up until this point, I have made a pretty clear through line that the Knight brothers on Dathomir, for whatever reason, have been capturing outsiders and selling them into slavery instead of just shooing them away or killing them. And the players know this. In fact, they know this because something has happened with Lily, the character that is the younger sister of Caitlin, which is a person who's working the Great Hunt, and is one of the NPCs they're interacting with fairly frequently. They know that she was captured on Dathomir and something with slavery, but they don't know what this slavery is. They don't know who they're being sold to. And also with Cookie's father, he has gone over to Dathomir and then got captured, and whether he got sold or not is still a little within reason of trying to figure out. But they asked this man, like, "Where's the Wookiee? Where are all the Wookiees at? Because we're here for them." And then the man cackles and basically says, "Oh, they're dead." And it's at this point that I know things are about to kick off, and the man turns to someone who's hiding in a bush next to him to his left and kind of signals him over, and then someone who's hiding next to him in a bush to his right and signals him over, and they both come over, and he whispers to them individually, and Alask makes a successful, really difficult perception check, so he's able to pick up on what they're saying. But he's saying to the guy on his left, "Go tell War Chief Dathomir about the outsiders." And then he turns to the other guy and he says, "Go tell Mother Adelaide about these outsiders and make it swift." And then these two guys just start taking off. They just start booking it away from the party and this guy. And this is when the party knows that they can't be seen. They can't. They've tried their hardest to stay kind of under wraps on this planet so that nobody knows they're here, and they just start taking shots. So they start shooting at the people who are running away to try to stop them from getting word out. And basically Venator hits the guy on the right who's running north and hits him right in the knee, and the guy like falls over face first into the swamp, and then just gets up and continues booking it. And at this point the players are like, "Whoa, these guys are a little difficult." And it turned out that the fight kicked off, and they did have a fairly difficult fight with them. These guys are big sacks of HP, and they're taking wounds, but they don't seem too affected by it, like pain wise. Like they're not affected by pain for whatever reason, or maybe they're just shrugging it off. And finally they take all 7 of these guys out, including the 2 scouts, before they can get away. And what I find really interesting is they then go and take one of the guys hostage. In fact, it was the guy that has been talking to them this entire time. And then they start asking him all sorts of questions. They're like, where are the Wookiees? And he keeps replying with, "They're dead. You'll never get them." And He looks to be pretty honest. At least he assumes that they're dead, from what the players can tell. And then he also keeps, saying that, go ahead and kill me. I'll come back. And they're at this point, the players are like, what the heck? What is going on this planet? That's crazy. This guy is not going to come back from the death. That's stupid. And the guy actually tries to kill himself. He tries to steal one of the weapons and just shoot himself, so that way the information isn't leaking through him. But eventually the players just kind of get fed up with him and kill him anyways, and they try to continue on south. They hide the bodies in a way that they don't think any other scouts will find them. And on one of the bodies they find basically a ledger of all of the scouts that go in and out of this camp and the camp to the north. So they have like this this patrol route that they manage to pick up on, so they can kind of get closer to the camp without alerting one of those patrols. And they're also able to get close enough to the camp to kind of observe it. And what they observe is that there seems to only be like 5 or 6 people in this camp, though it's a camp for 20 or 30 people. So they move a bit closer. The walls are these like huge, just giant pieces of wood that have been spiked into the ground in kind of like a log cabin way. And it's really hard to see through. So they kind of get close to the gate. There's no immediate guards there, so they work their way in. And 2 of the players, Alask and Gand, sneak their way into the camp to try to figure out what the heck is inside of it. Alask goes to the south, Gand goes to the north. Gand finds a tent that seems to have a ton of supplies in it, so he goes and gets inside of it sneakily and finds that there are, a ton of boxes, and these boxes are technological. They're not primitive like everything else around here. So clearly someone is supplying these Knight brothers with something. Supplies or whatever it may be, weapons maybe, food, they don't know. So then Alask in the south cuts through a ton of the tents because he's in the backside of them. He's using his knife to cut openings in, and he's kind of up against the wall, so that way if there is a Knight brother, he can kind of remain seen. And he peers into all of these tents, and they all appear to be, just tents with bedrolls and stuff in them. But he does make his way inside of one that catches his eye because it has something on the ground that he can't quite make out. So he makes his way inside of it. There's nobody inside of it. But what he finds is a jacket. It's a bomber jacket, kind of like, like old pilots used to wear in the Star Wars universe. So they end up going. And what I find really interesting here is he picks it up and he puts it on because it has a name tag on it, and it's the name tag of Lily. And he just knows that he needs to get this jacket out of this camp, and that now there is hope. Lily might be somewhere on this planet or might be alive somewhere. Like this gives the players hope. So they reconvene. Gand finds a shield that he ends up taking to Cookie, and Cookie pretty much just says, yeah, that's my father's shield. So something is happening on this planet. These people are clearly on this planet, and we need to find them. So at this point, Cookie now has his father's axe and his father's shield, and Alask is walking around with this crazy cool bomber jacket with the Saphira logo on it, and the name title of Lily, which doesn't work for him technically, but he is going to kind of keep this jacket safe. That is his new little mission in life. And it was at that point that was actually a whole new session. That was the end of that session because the fight took a little long, the sneaking around took a little long. But then they headed up to the Camp Bora in the north, which is the other camp that they found. And this one is quite a long journey and a new session. So they made sure that they were really stealthy, headed up to the north. And they started making perception checks. And then what I find cool is that Six, playing Doc, decided, hey, I have all these new force powers that I could be using, so let's try to use force sense. So he's trying to sense any dangers around them. And when he uses it, they're about halfway to this camp. He uses it, and then as soon as he doesn't sense anything, but he hears a giant roar, and the rest of the players hear it as well. They hear a giant roar off in the distance, coming from where, close by this camp that they're headed. And they're like, okay, that was weird. Let's push on. So they keep pushing on. They're stealthing through the jungle, and then, Doc uses it again. They hear this roar. It's a bit closer. And they're like, what the heck is this roar? And they're not putting 2 and 2 together here. So they move closer, And eventually they're on the outside of this camp, and they're up on this pretty big hill that overlooks it. And the good thing is they're kind of out of the water at this point in the swamp. But this hill seems to be like one of few around, and they're able to look down within the camp. It's nighttime on the planet at this point, so they can see into the camp. They can see people in there and make out details, but they don't feel like they can be seen at all because it is so dark out in the swamp. And they decide to kind of set up camp on the other side of the hill so they can, put a fire down and maybe not be seen. And they decide to rest. And Doc again uses his force power to sense, and they hear this roar, and it's even closer now. And at this point, they put it together. They're like, whatever the heck is out there is being drawn to you using this power. You need to stop. And Doc is like, that makes total sense. And what it is in reality, and the players don't know this, is it was a attack, which I've mentioned before. It's basically this mutated rancor that was experimented on long ago by Sith, and they were trying to create something of a battle machine, with these crazy creatures. And what they ended up creating was a creature that devours the Force and eats Force users. So I, logically, put my own twist on that, which is, yeah, he could probably sense when the Force is being used around him. And now that Doc has used it 3 times, this thing may be on their way. And this is a little tip to other GMs out there, is this thing will kill them. Like, there is no doubt about it. They almost died to that Rancor. This thing is about 8 times more powerful, especially against Force users. You could track Force users at a certain distance. So this thing is very, very deadly. And I made sure that when I was describing the roars, I had a sound bite that I gave them, and I made sure that it sounded terrifying so that they did not want to ever have to deal with fighting this thing. But one of the observations that they've made upon, hearing these roars and everything is that it's coming from the east, and on the camp, there are a ton of people on the east now. All of their guards and stuff have really pretty much picked up their weapons and are now sitting on the east side of the camp, and they're looking really shifty. Even from this far away, they can kind of like determine that. And the players set up camp, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to rest a bit, and then we're going to try to get this creature to attack the camp, which is not something I was necessarily expecting. I was putting the Torrent attack there as maybe a hazard, but potentially a way for them to get into this camp, and they ended up using it in a really clever way, and we'll get to that in a moment. But when they're setting up camp, they hear something to the south, and they go and investigate. And it's basically like a banshee just floating around in the swamp, which gives the players a really good sense of there is something really creepy happening on this planet, and they need to be really careful because they've never seen anything like this before. And it's just this like wailing ghost just floating around. They decide to not, with a successful stealth check, they decide to not alert it to their camp, so that way they're not having attention drawn to them. But dawn comes after having a nice little rest. Venator up in the trees again makes another perception check, fails, doesn't notice anything. So they head down to the camp, and Alask is on the south with most of the other party members. Venator and Doc head to the west of the camp. And on the south, they make a little hole so they're able to kind of see into the camp through the wall and kind of get a gauge of what's going on. And on the west side of the camp, the players had a really good idea. They're like, we need to give whatever this creature is enough sense of where you are that the creature is then drawn straight to the camp, because we're in between where we think the creature is and where the camp is. So they have a really good idea. They get out these like training swords, and Doc and Venator are kind of fighting each other. And it's something they've done before because Venator really wants to train a Jedi, and now he sees that this guy has force powers, and, this guy might be worthy of training. So they start fighting each other, and then after a few rolls, because they are rolling against each other, Venator is winning. So I make the decision on the next roll. I use a destiny point. I use a dark side of destiny point, which I then use as a narrative. I don't do this often, but when I do, it tends to be because I think something cool should happen and would happen with these characters in the situation where Venator gets another lucky shot off and hits Doc real hard, and Doc, pretty much the rage within inside of him fuels this, and he throws down the training weapon and picks up his pike and stabs Venator in the chest. And Venator takes a bit of damage, but what ends up happening is Doc drops the weapon instantly, realizing what happened. You know, he kind of fed on that dark side, and because of that, they hear that roar, and it's way close now. And they start looking down, and the water in the swamp, you see like the kind of the Jurassic Park thing happening, where the ripples in the water are happening, and the players know that this is it. This thing is about to attack, and they hear a ton of yelling and shouting in the camp, and then they hear a giant bang, a few of them, as whatever it is breaking through the wall of this camp. And again, they've never seen this creature. They don't know what it is. They've just heard it at this point. And the people on the south end of the camp look through, and they see pretty much the entire camp headed to the east. They're trying to protect whatever it is, and they see like shards of wood like burst out as whatever it is breaks into the camp through these doors, and they hear this crazy battle going on. So now is their chance to them. They're like, we need to get in this camp now because everybody is distracted. So they work their way in, and they find kind of like a fighting pit in the middle of the camp, which has a ton of bones in it, and not like the bones of creatures or anything, but the bones of people. So whatever's happening, this isn't like a pit where people fight creatures. This is a pit where people fight people. And they kind of put two and two together, and they're like, okay, these Knight brothers might be having like a gladiatorial thing happen. And they go throughout a few of the tents, and they find a large one that has a cage in it. And in the cage are 8 people, and they're just humans. And the people look really distraught, and like they've been in here a while and maybe are not fed very well. And they look at some of them, and some of them all have jackets on, and the jackets have that Saphira Hunters logo on them. And they start looking around, and they're like, are any of you Lily? And the people are like, no, we haven't seen her since the moment we were captured. And they're like, ah, crap. Well, so they break open the cage, and they get everybody out, and they run outside the camp. And at this point, what I had done game-wise is the players are seeing all of these tokens. There's about 20 or 30 Knight Brother and a couple of Night Sisters fighting this crazy creature. So they did get a visual on this creature. And what they end up seeing is this creature like using some crazy abilities, and he takes out like a good chunk of the group of Knight Brothers, and then they observe this woman in the back kind of do something. There's like magic that comes from her hands, and suddenly those people that fell over, a lot of them get back up despite them being like maimed and everything, and they look clearly dead, but they're back up, and they start fighting, and they're kind of feral at this point. And the players are like, what the heck is going on? This is crazy. And then they observe one other thing, which is there are a couple women in like hoods, and they have masks that cover their face. And these women pull out what looks like a bow, but when they go to fire it, what looks like a blaster beam, forms as the line. And they pull it back, and then another beam forms as the arrow, and they launch it, and it shoots basically a blaster bolt. And they're like, how the heck is that possible? Like that weapon is crazy. Let's not fight those things. And they get the heck out of there. They're like, we have no idea what was going on there. There's some crazy things going on with these Knight Brothers and Night Sisters. And they call their ship, because their ship has an AI, and the ship flies over, doing its best to be sneaky, as much as a ship can be. And it lands and picks up all these Saphira Hunters. They get in the ship, and they fly back and land on their original landing spot. Now, one bit of information that I left obscured there, because I wanted to kind of touch on it all at once, is when they were sneaking up to the camp, they heard a voice on the other side of the wall that was familiar to them. It was one voice followed by 2 other voices. They didn't recognize the 2 other voices, but they recognized one of them, and they recognized it as Vakran, which is the leader of the Knight Brothers, he's been on Ord Mantell this entire time. And one of the reasons they came to this planet is because before leaving, they went and investigated his office when he wasn't there, and started kind of searching through his stuff. And they found a ledger which was just saying like, where he's going to be, and he had provided himself transportation off the planet to go to Dathomir. So the players technically followed him here to try to find him. But when they found him on the planet and he was on the other side of this wall, they heard a conversation happening. They couldn't really make out what it was. And then suddenly he gets into a small 2-person ship and takes off and flies away. And they hadn't been able to see the ship previously because it was on the wall closest to them. So from overlooking the camp from this hill, they couldn't quite see it. So they just had no idea that it was there. So he gets into this ship and flies away. So at this point, they have saved some Saphira hunters, 8 of them. They have seen Vakran or know that he was here for whatever reason, and they suspect him to be a part of these murders on Ord Mantell and whatever abductions are happening and selling into slavery, and they want to stop that, especially Doc now. That's kind of his whole motivation, is he wants to stop slavery as much as he can. And they move on. They fly down to their original landing spot on the planet, and they go and talk to some of these Saphira hunters. And the one that steps forward to as kind of their leader is a man named Phillips Ballas. And he reveals himself to be the uncle of Caitlin and Lily. And they pretty much say there were 12 of them, 13 in total, with Lily, but they haven't seen Lily since the day they were captured. And the other 4 of them died in the fighting pits, where they were forced to fight against each other. And they're one of those, death is honor kind of people. So they went down without a fight, or with a fight, but, not necessarily doing it to stay alive. They did it, sacrificing themselves, those 4, knowing that the other 8 might be able to escape one day. So the players are like, you guys are cool. They leave them on the ship, and they tell their AI, which is not supposed to be there, to kind of lay low, and he does so. But they move to the north, and at this point they're headed to the Night Sister encampment. And I'm going to wrap up this episode here, because that's where the session ended for the night. Those were 2 sessions that we just went over, but what ended up happening, and this is something that I want to discuss, is, first of all, what happens in the next session. I want to go into much more detail, so I kind of wanted to save that as its own, even though originally I was like, I could do Dathomir as one episode. That's not going to happen. And it all boils down to, again, what kind of happened in the game, which at this point, the players are like, why are we even here on this planet? This planet has crazy stuff that can clearly kill us. They know that now. They got close to death once, and they're like, we don't want to be here. And a couple of the players are just like, we need to leave. Like, I don't care about being on this planet anymore. We need to leave. And what came across was one of the players just pretty much being done. He just didn't want to be here. He was clearly not enjoying this content. And at some point, as a GM, you kind of feel like you failed with that, because you're like, well, dang, like, this was supposed to be really cool. You guys are supposed to enjoy this. But if they're not having fun, I'm not having fun. And I, decided to kind of push them forward in the next session to kind of get them off of the planet, because I didn't want them being here anymore if they weren't having fun. And the only reason they were here at this point was to get Cookie's father, which they didn't even know was alive or not. So they had to go up to this Night Sister fortress, which is in the north, and potentially, save him from these people. But again, they don't know whether or not he's even alive. So the players at this point are feeling pretty pointless. Like, they're like, well, why are we even here? We need to leave as quickly as possible. And like I said, you never want to be in that position as a GM. You want them to be liking the content they're in. But I also understand if they're not enjoying it, to kind of move on. And in fact, that's what we end up doing. I try to kind of give them a big bang at the end of this content to make it all feel worth it. And where I feel like that mindset came in was, it was down to 2 aspects. One, I was expecting this content to take them 2 weeks. Turned out to take like 5. And the other part of this is there were a lot of breaks in between this content. Players had to like go on different trips and stuff. So we had to take a week off, or maybe 2 weeks off in between this stuff. So they felt like they were on Dathomir for far too long, and they weren't doing the content they wanted to do, which was the Great Hunt. And that instead they were kind of dealing with Cookie's father. So I kind of understand where they're coming from on it. And upon reflection, which is all you can really do as a GM, I see, I probably put too much on Dathomir. They didn't need to do all of the camps, but they did One thing they did need to do was the cave, and I'm glad that I could kind of lead them there for that, so that way Doc can kind of change his character. But yeah, I feel like they were there for just far too long, and that was their reason for exhaustion on this content. But in the next session, they managed to do some really cool stuff and kind of get resolution here, and then get the heck off this planet. So we'll talk about that in the next episode. But if you have any questions on anything that happened, how I managed to put a creature that would clearly kill the characters, but managed to make sure the players knew that, that's a whole different technical challenge that a GM can kind of learn and everything like that. Let me know if you have any questions. But with all that being said, we shall see you guys next time.